Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In alhamdulillah. Wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulihi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa salam. Wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsani ila yawm ad-din wa ba'd. So we'd like to welcome you all to our second week of our Friday Night Lights. This is a class where we're discussing spiritual discourses, inshallah ta'ala. And we're using the book that's called Fathul Rabbani. Anybody know what the meaning of Fathul Rabbani is? Anybody remember the translation of Fathul Rabbani? Fathul Rabbani. Yeah, the opening. What kind of opening? Yeah. The sublime opening, or the divine opening, or the sublime inspiration. All right, and this is by one of the great scholars of Tasawwuf, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Anybody remember what year he was born or which year he died? He was from a place called Jilani, so his name is Jilani. Where is Jilani? Those for those who were here last week or tuned in. Nobody. So it was in Iran. What year was he born? Look it up. I wasn't here for that. Okay. He was born in the year 470 AH. And what century is that? For the Hijri.
Oh, that's the 5th century.
The 5th century Hijri. What century Hijri are we in now?
15th.
15th century. All right. Good. You remember what couple of his nicknames? What he was known as? Without looking it up. I'll spoil with Google, man.
No, I actually had notes, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Online, too, you all can answer. He was known as Al-Baz Ashab, the Gray Falcon. And the other one, he was known as al-Ghawth al-A'zam, the greatest aid, meaning the greatest aid in this science of tasawwuf or spirituality, or tazkiyatun nafs zud, or whatever term you want to use, saluk. All of them are about the same thing, right? And so who else lived in this time? So when he was born, there was another great scholar that was born at that time.
Ghazali came later, right?
No, Ghazali was born in 455.
Okay, so
and he died in 505.
Okay.
Yes. So he was born before them, but he died before Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani. How old was Shaykh Abdul Qadir Jilani when he passed? Yeah, he was in his 90s. He was like about 91 years old. And I put a link in his bio that you could check out. And so last week we talked about Fathul Rabbani. What is the book about? The divine openings or the sublime inspirations. Mm-hmm. It's about Tazkiyatun Nafs, but what format was this book written? Anybody online? Where was he residing when this book was written, or these books rather? Where did he teach? So this was a series of sermons that he did with some of his students when he was in Baghdad. And they said they had over 400 students who were his murids. They used to record these gatherings, which reached up to 70,000 people at some times. So this book is a volume. It's a volumes of books or sermons that he used to preach about these spiritual discourses, inshallah. So we're covering these in this class. All right. Anybody remember what we talked about last week? What was the main topic? And so he called them majalis. So majalis is plural for jalis or sitting, jalsa. So the gatherings and where he would disperse this information, the spiritual knowledge to people when they would write it down. All right. And so it's called Fathul Rabbani. Anybody know any other books by Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani? He wrote a book that's called Futuhul Ghaib, the openings of the unseen. So discussing these spiritual discourses, and it was so powerful. So you hear about certain people when they talk about this word Sufism, tasawwuf, they say it's a bid'ah and it has no foundation. You know, one of the great scholars, the Hanbali school was Ibn Taymiyyah. He wrote 100-page commentary on Futuhul Ghaib. So if you know, and you know these certain people, they always refer to Ibn Taymiyyah. You hear him as Shaykh al-Islam. You know, you would think he's the greatest scholar since sliced bread, right? For certain groups. But then when we talk about this science of soul purification, they don't mention these things. So if he thought that Sufism was a bid'ah, would he have wrote a 100-page commentary on the work of Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani? He would have refuted him, you know. But he, just like many great Sufi scholars, had an issue with some of the bad practices in Tasawwuf, not the science itself. Because the science itself is nothing but ihsan, which is described in what hadith? Hadith we already covered. Anybody except you, Brother Isa. Yeah, the hadith of Jibril, which covers what topics? When the angel Jibril came to the Prophet ﷺ, he asked him 3 questions. What is Islam? What is Iman? And what is Ihsan? All right. And so he asked him about Islam, which deals with fiqh or the rulings, acts of worship or acts, matters related to the body or to the external. Then he asked him about Iman, which is Aqidah, and these are acts related to the mind, you know, belief, Tawheed, Iman, you know, Ilm al-Kalam, all of these synonyms. And then he asked him what was Ihsan. And what did the Prophet ﷺ respond with when he said, what is Ihsan? This is in the 40 hadith. Yeah, go ahead. Yes. And if you don't see him, yes. And so this is the essence of ihsan or suluk or tasawwuf or zuhud or tazkiyatul nafs, whichever term you want to use. It's about being diligent in your worship and knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sees you and knowing that you're under surveillance and nothing escapes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so you act accordingly with your behavior, both inside and out. And how difficult is that? Super difficult, right? So, all right, tell you. Okay, and so in the first discourse, we were talking about what he said that if a person, they would object to they would object to Allah if they object to the divine decree. So he said, like, if you have problems with the qadr or accepting the qadr, it is almost as if you're rejecting Allah. So in other words, he was saying you have to learn to accept the divine decree. And he said, if you don't, then it is almost as if your deen leaves you. You know, your belief will leave you because qadr is one of the biggest things that you have to accept. All right. And he says that a person, he mentioned that your tawakkul on Allah will die, your tawheed will die, and all of these things will die if you lose focus about when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decrees something for you. And the decree of Allah is in the hadith of Jibril. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was asked about the qadr, he said, وَتُؤْمِنُوا بِاللَّهِ خَيْرِهِ وَشَرِّهِ. And so he said, and to believe in the qadr is good and it's evil. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who decrees and determines every affair. So when something evil happens, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed it to happen, but he doesn't will for people he doesn't will it for people. You understand what I'm saying? He doesn't will evil for people. He doesn't choose evil for a person. A person earns that for themselves, but the decree has good and evil in it. All right. And then he mentioned something about the nafs, that the nafs is naturally mukhalif. It is something that is always opposing. It is always fighting anything that disrupts its comfort. So our souls naturally want to be comfortable, want to be settled, want ease, want leisure, and anything that disrupts that, the soul will fight against it. So he's saying that you have to learn how to train your soul and struggle and fight it, to rid yourself of these things, because there are going to be difficulties in your life. And if you don't learn how to deal with them, this thing will take you where your actual foundation of Iman will die. So this is discussion that he's saying. All right, any questions from that? And then he starts to mention about the ego and the nafs and the believing heart. So he said that the person who has true Iman, that they don't really care about whether good or bad happens to them, because their focus is on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So in other words, it's a station that you have to reach. There's a level of training your soul to get to these kind of stations. All right. And so this is the importance of the science of tasawwuf, why it was considered a separate science, and why spiritual masters became masters in it, because it is the way to overcome yourself. Right. So that's where we left off last week. All right. Any questions about that last week, inshallah? And so remember, this book that we're doing, we're just taking it piece by piece. It's not really where you have to take notes. This is just to internalize things, to get these jewels that the Shaykh imparted to us. All right. And so we'll present the next slide, inshallah. This full screen. It's not to it. Hold on.
The hadith of the angel Jibril. That when is that when he came, Jibril came to as a visitor, as a traveler.
Yes.
And he was clean.
Yes.
And he asked him some questions.
Yes.
Told him that he spoke the truth.
Yes.
And then left.
Yes.
And he told the companions to go look for him and couldn't find him.
Yes. That's it. That's the second hadith in the collection of 40 hadith. Okay, get this together. Okay, so he continues to talk about the nafs, and he mentions in the book, he said that the nafs as a whole is evil within evil. And so the soul has something that's evil in it. When the Prophet ﷺ, he received the ayah in the Quran, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we mentioned this in the tafsir class, that they came to and asked the Prophet about the soul, and he didn't respond, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent them the revelation. Well, yes, alunaka aniruh, and they ask you about the soul, like what is it about the soul, the spirit? And then the Prophet ﷺ was told to say, "Cool, al-ruh min Rabbi, al-ruh min amri Rabbi," that the soul is from the command of my Lord. Wa ma utitum min al-ilm illa qalil, and what you have been given as knowledge of it is only a little. And so this is the meaning of the soul that we possess in our body. How to really process it and purify it is difficult, because the soul in and of itself has levels that the soul don't even know. They said that the heart has things that the heart doesn't recognize. And the heart, the qalb, the ruh, and the nafs, they're all synonymous, right? And so he's saying that the nafs as a whole is evil within evil. So all of us have an element of evil in us, and then there's an evil part of us that we might not know about until something triggers us, and then we don't even know where it came from. That's the properties that your souls possess. And why is this thing so important? Because this is how people can turn into monsters. People can do really evil, dastardly deeds. People can become known for evil. He said, but when it is fought, opposed, and subdued, and it comes to peace, then it is wholly and fully transformed. And then it becomes good within good, right? And so he's describing the nature of the soul. If you don't take care of it, like we mentioned last week, a narration that's attributed to Imam Ali, radiallahu anhu wa karramallahu wajhahu, he said that your soul is like a wild horse and you are the rider. If you take your eyes off of it for one moment, it will throw you off. It will throw you to the ground. So this is the power of your soul and the things that it suggests to you and the things that we allow it to lead us to do things. Our emotions are contained in the soul. Our thinking process, part of it, you know, and sometimes it fights against our rational thinking. How many times we got caught in something, our minds told us don't do it, and the soul and the heart was like, do it. And that's where we got trapped off, you know. So he's saying that once you work on removing this evil or even recognizing, because part of the purification of soul is to be able to recognize the pinpoint where it starts to go astray. And that's a daily operation. It's like almost you have to give all of your time to it, you know. And then he says, but when it becomes good, it is good within good, and then it becomes compliant and compatible with virtue, and it obeys all that it is required to obey. And when all sinfulness, rebellion, and disobedience is abandoned from it, the word he used here is al-ma'asi. So al-ma'asi means sins, the transgressions, whether major sins or minor sins. We have to work to stay away from those things because they are displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when the soul reaches this state, when we're working on removing all of the evil out of it that we can recognize, and the good will show up, it becomes a good soul. This is the soul that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will say on the judgment day as a command. It will tell the soul, Ya ayyuha nafs al-mutma'inna, oh you reassured soul, or the soul that's at peace, oh tranquil soul. Mutma'inna means like tranquil, reassured, at ease. Irji ila rabbika radiya mardiya, return to your Lord well pleased and pleasing to him. So that is a reward for the one who took care of the strenuous effort to purify themselves from evil thoughts, evil responses, evil actions, and all of the things that the soul and the heart and the mind, because all of those are connected. You know, when your heart has something on it, sometimes you have to express it. There are things in your soul that are repressed that might come out by triggering all of this stuff. So tasawwuf is the science of identifying these traits within yourself and learning how to remove them and replace them with praiseworthy traits. And so this is what he's saying is the nafs, you know, and that's the part we have to understand first, how difficult this soul that we only given a little bit of knowledge of, as Allah mentioned in the Quran. And that little bit of knowledge of the soul that we know is the one that prompts us to do evil, prompts us to do haram, we know it's wrong, prompt us to go after something and we know better, you know, prompt us to ego to tell us, yeah, just forget about it, Allah will forgive you, or not even, or prompt you to think that you know, you don't need to ask for forgiveness because you didn't do any wrong. All of these character defects that we see in people, and then we are able to see them in people, part of them are in ourselves. You know, it's a saying that says the things that you despise in people is what you have in yourself. So somebody, you know, how we see somebody do a sin and stuck for the law, what's wrong with them? You know, part of that is in us too. You know, the Prophet ﷺ said that the Muslim is a mirror to another Muslim. And so anything you see in your brother that's reprehensible or despicable, part of that is in you too, you know. And so just because you didn't have, you know, that nobody knows it. You know, look at all the stuff that's going on. What's my man's name, the football player? Yeah, you know, everybody's looking at him like he's crazy, you know. But, you know, if your soul is not trained, you know, and, you know, we say this growing up, you know, if you grow up, you didn't get girls, you know, they called you ugly, you know what I'm saying? Now you get some bread, you think you're a superstar. So anything that comes down and triggers your emotions or pierces your heart, you go after it. And then you look like a fool. Like he's looking like a fool right now. Yeah, 20. And just like, you know, all the money you got, you know, you're supposed to behave better. You don't just meet a random girl at the gym and then you have it, yeah, and all the stuff that's going on with that, you know. But this is the part of the evil of the soul and the defects that is, if it's unchecked, it leads into all of these fulfilling desires. Because the soul naturally wants to fulfill desires. And the one who has a trained soul who wants to get to this level, is trying to, fight those desires, Inshallah. Any questions on that?
This is called the soul.
The science of purifying the soul is called tasawwuf. It's tasawwuf. It's called taskiyat to nafs, soul purification. It's called suluk, wayfaring. It's called zuhd, or detachment from the worldly life. All of those are synonyms, right? But they all have the same meaning of identifying the defects in your soul, which transfers to your heart and your mind, and ridding yourself of them, and then replacing them with praiseworthy traits. And it's also called ihsan. That's what the hadith of Jibril alayhi salam is, the signs of ihsan. Worshiping Allah in this pure inward and outward state as if he's seeing you. Presenting yourself before Allah, because every time we offer salat and every time we do a good deeds, this is a presentation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We want to present our best selves. And so we have to remove that lower part of ourselves, and that's difficult, All right, any questions on that? Okay, and then the next part, he talks about the transformation of the soul. So first, when he mentions about the soul already is an evil within the evil, a lot of the stuff we're not even aware about because we only have a little bit of knowledge of the soul, but we also can recognize the good part. So there's a great effort in purifying yourself and removing bad traits from yourself. And then he says, so after the person does that kind of work and removing all the blameworthy traits, and so we mentioned how many defects of the soul that they identified. We mentioned that last week. We came up with a number. At least 2,000. At least 2,000 character defects or defects of the soul. And so how many of us know how many defects we have in ourselves? I mean, or the ones that we are ready to identify with. Because we know ourselves, but which ones are we ready to accept? Because if somebody told us we were stingy, oh, no, I put $5 in the sadaqah box yesterday. No, you're stingy. You put 5 out of 5,000 or whatever you have. People have 2 and 3 bank accounts. I remember talking to some people, they said they do not let their account go down to a certain level. Like, what are you doing with all this stuff,
Me personally, I be thinking, people tell me that I'm hard and very self-critical on myself and that I'm really a great person and this and that. I've been looking at them like,
But to know that you're not, that's part of identifying that, how you could purify yourself. Because when you can say that, because some people people get gassed up by that stuff. Somebody tell, oh, you're a great person. You know what? The soul start talking to you untrained. Yeah, I am kind of a good person. I do my work. I do this. Shaitan is playing you the whole time.
The things that you conceal, Allah knows it.
Yes.
Allah knows. But like to you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think that I'm, great.
Yeah, the ego will tell you, yeah, ain't nothing wrong with me,
But Allah knows me.
Yeah. As one of the companions said, when someone praised him to his face, and he said, if you knew what I knew about myself, he said, you would spit in my face. Companion said this. How much more so for us? So then he says that the nafs, it starts to experience a rightful yearning on its own. Once you remove those bad character traits, the soul already, as it has the potential to do evil, it has more of a potential to do good, right? And so as the evil of the soul begins to depart, or you start to remove it, and it loses all attachments to created things, and then this proves, the Sheikh mentions, this proves that it is connected to the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam, who had that soul, the nafs al-mutma'inna, the soul that is reassured. So the story of Ibrahim, as we all know, that he forsook his nafs, and he remained unaffected and unmoved by passions. So how many stories do we know about Prophet Ibrahim where this happened?
Kill his son.
Yes, he was ready to kill his son. Like there was no emotion behind it. He came and just said, Allah has commanded me to slaughter you. He told his wife, I had to leave you here. I put you in the middle of the desert, and I've been commanded to leave you here. And then the story that the Sheikh mentions here is when having a heart that remained calm, because when your heart is moved by passions and desires, it affects your judgment. So Ibrahim, the story about when he was thrown into the fire, and so his heart was full of submission and trust. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran, where he says, Kulina ya nar, kuni bardan wa salaman ala Ibrahim. O fire, be coolness and safety upon Ibrahim alayhi salam. And so the Sheikh mentions this in the book, but I didn't find this tafsir, but I'm not saying that it doesn't exist. He said that when the story happened with Ibrahim alayhi salam, when they brought him to the fire, there were people there was trying to help him because he was a young man, and they knew he was a good kid, and they were trying to help him, like, don't let the fire burn him. And it's reported that Ibrahim said, no, my total trust is in Allah. Like, he denied help. Now, can you imagine what kind of soul that was? You're right there, like a blazing fire, and they get ready to burn you, and you deny help, So this is the status. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the fire to be cool, right? And so this is one of the discussions in Aqidah when you talk about Ilm al-Kalam, about fire. Does fire have the capacity to burn in and of itself, or is it by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanding the fire to burn? In other words, is it automatic that a fire can burn you? But this is proof that the fire can only burn you if Allah wills it.
Right.
I mean, we seen stuff that you can look online, people in fires that didn't get burnt. And so this was an actual thing. So, nothing new under the sun. And so he told them, like, I'm fully confident that my Lord will take care of me, right? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions earlier in the surah about Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and what kind of person he was. And he said that he gave Ibrahim, he said, we have certainly given Ibrahim his sound judgment, rushdahu, rushed. You hear the word Rashid, like guided, having sound judgment. And we were of him well knowing. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us in the Quran that they knew how Ibrahim was going to behave. And so that's why they made the fire be cool. Because Ibrahim had that he had that sound judgment and that dedication that he wasn't scared. Because you remember the story in Surah Anbiya, the 21st surah, how the story started. When he was living with his people, he stepped to his father. What are you doing worshiping these idols? And asked the people, why do y'all worship these idols when you know that they don't cause you no harm or good? And they said, are you messing with our bread now? These are idols we believe in that cause us harm or good. And so they had a festival, and when they left, so Ibrahim didn't just leave it alone. He waited till they left. You all know the tafsir about this. He waited till they left, and he destroyed the idols. And he left the thing he used to destroy them. He put it on the neck of the biggest one. And so when they came back, they was like, "Who did this to our idols?" And they was like, the gospel. I heard the young boy Ibrahim did it. You know what I mean? You want to check with him? And so they came and asked him. And so instead of he didn't because prophets their necessary traits is they don't lie. So when they asked him, "Did you do this to our gods?" He didn't lie and say he didn't do it. He said, "Ask the biggest one. Ask him who did it." And so he was using the sound judgment that Allah gave him. And they said, they can't talk to us. They can't respond. They can't hear. Well, why do you worship them? So he made them look like fools. And so that's when they said, we got to do something with this kid. We got to burn him. And they didn't do it. So this, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, this rush with sound judgment, it means sound judgment, righteousness, and guidance. And this is the quality of Ibrahim alayhi salam. All right.
Was there like the one lie that he told, like supposedly, like where when they went to the festival, his excuse for not going or something?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it wasn't necessarily a lie though. I know what you're talking about. And there's another narration I remember reading about Ibrahim, when he was traveling with his wife Hajar, and I think he ran into some people and they asked him where he was from. He said, min mat. You know what min mat means? From water. But there's an actual place that was called mat. So technically he didn't lie, you know.
Something about like,
So he meant I'm from water. I'm from the seed, you know, Adam.
I remember something about like a king being interested in a wife and like saying that the wife was like his sister, so that like
Yeah, that was Ibrahim. That's another story.
right.
That's another story. Yep. MashaAllah. So this all relates to this word rushd, having sound judgment and being sharp in his mind to avoid danger, you know. So, all right. And so then the Sheikh mentions about what is true patience. And so after he mentions the story of Ibrahim, remarkable patience and trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then he says, for one who is patient with Allah, the help of Allah in this world is without reckoning or without limit. And in the hereafter, it is the same, without reckoning or limit, without limit. And Allah says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّى أَصَابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. And so surely the patient will be paid their wages in full without reckoning. This is Surah Zumar ayat 10. And so this word, we covered this in the 40 hadith, if anybody remember the word innama. You all remember that word? Innama al-a'malu bi-niyyah wa innama likulli imri'in ma nawah. The hadith about the intentions. You know the English, right? The first hadith about niyyah and the 40 hadith. Yeah, what is the first part?
Like a person who intends a bad.
I think we're ready to call people out. Should I name names? Yeah.
Intends a good
He said, verily, that your actions are only by intentions. Innamal a'malu binniyat. So this word innamal, it denotes exclusivity, meaning like everything that you say after that and nothing else, right? Innamal a'mal binniyat. Your actions are only going to be by what your niyyah is. And so if your niyyah is not if it's not pure and it's not sincere, then the actions that follow it is going to be based on what that niyyah is. And so you have to pay attention to the niyyah, because you're only going to get what you really intended. You can tell yourself, I intend to do this, but if your heart is really saying something else, that's what's going to happen. The actions are proof of what you really intended. And so then the rest of the hadith was Allah, or the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever makes hijrah for Allah and his messenger, then the hijrah is for Allah and his messenger. And whoever makes hijrah seeking the dunya, or imra'atin yunkihuha, or to marry a woman, then that's what they would get. And the explanation we gave about the hadith was, but the man who was called Muhajir Qais, the one who made hijrah for Qais. So a man wanted to marry a lady named Qais, but she already made the hijrah to Medina. And she said, if you want to marry me, you got to come to Medina, you know. And modern days now, if you want to marry me or you want to get me, you got to fly out. And so that was her condition. And he did. That's what he made hijrah for, to marry the woman. So that's what he got, a wife, you know. So if you do something and your intention, the actions is going to reflect your intention more than what your intention that you tell yourself. So, and the scholars tell us to always renew our intention and purify our intention. And so here he mentions about the person who has this patience or true patience, like Ibrahim, they will have their reward with Allah, bighayri hisab. Bighayri hisab actually means literally like without any counting. Hisab means like reckoning, or computing something or calculating something. That a person will have their reward with Allah, it will be without any limit, right? For having this kind of patience. And then it says that nothing is hidden from Allah, especially not the burdens borne by those who suffer for his sake. So many times when we're going through trials or tribulations or calamities, the soul might make us feel like, the nafs is telling us, Allah is not going to get me out of this one. I done did too much stuff. I don't really deserve his mercy. When he's telling us time again, his mercy outweighs his wrath. But when the soul is not trained to have mutma'inna, have safety, it starts telling us these things, and then we start losing hope. You know, how am I going to do this one? You know, I ain't going to be forgiven for this one, man. This is too deep. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reassuring us, no, ask for forgiveness, he will forgive. Especially with burdens. So, you know, when we get burdened with something, things happen, you know, we plan Allah's plans, and then a thing, you know, takes a turn for the worse, and that's when people can lose it, you know. So he's saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala especially does not forget about these things when you're patient in times of calamity. And so he says here, be patient with him for an hour. Isbiru ma'ahu sa'atan. Be patient with him for an hour, and you will see his grace and favor for years. وَقَدْ رَأَيْتَهُمْ لِطْفَهُ وَإِنَامَهُ سِنِينَ. Now, if you think about that for a moment, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not bound by time. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not subjected to time. Time doesn't pass over Allah. Meaning that anything that time passes over, it has a beginning and it has an end. And then during that time, it's going to decline. It's going to deteriorate. And some reason it's going to get worse than it was. This doesn't apply to Allah. So if he's saying that if you're patient for an hour, the reward that you get from him, this grace and his favor, is for years. And so for years for you is a lot. But for Allah, it's nothing. So he's giving, you know, be patient in these times of hard calamities. You know, when things look like rock bottom, when you can't see past the horizon, you don't know how you're going to get through it. You can't see yourself getting past this. That is the time to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's how you get that soul to transform. You know. And then he says, courage is an hour's patience. Shuja', to have courage is like a patience for an hour. You know. And of course, an hour, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is referring to an hour, it's a lot of time, you know. But for us, you know, if you go through an hour of calamities, it seems like it's never ending. And in our time, we might go through something that, and when you're in the mix of it, it's like, man, you know, anything, heartbreak, you know, divorce, you know, losing a home, losing a job, losing a family member, you know, it'll be like times that, you know, you don't see yourself getting through it. How many people don't get over deaths of people? You know how people, what's those things in the wall when they bury their family in the wall? Mausoleums. You know, I heard somebody say that they just couldn't picture their family going in the ground. And you know, all the janazas we've done, you know, I heard a couple family members, they just couldn't be there to see that. That was too much. You know, so that was a calamity that they couldn't see themselves getting over. But you bear those things with patience, whatever it is, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you years. And he mentions here lutf from the word latif. Allah will give you gentleness, ease, you know, virtues and favors. And amihi, like a favor, a gift. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give you a gift that keeps on giving, the gift of sabr. And then he mentions here in the ayat in Surah Al-Baqarah, ayat 153, Inna Allah ma'as sabirin, that for sure, that Allah is with those who have patience. And not just sabirin that we tell ourselves we have. Man, I was patient, I waited 10 minutes and they didn't show up, so I left. No, sabr, know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to take care of your affair, like in the stories of Ibrahim and many of the other prophets, you know, alayhimus salam. And so true patience is the one where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and working on the soul, because it takes patience to reform yourself, especially when you don't really know yourself, you know, like you think you do. You know, if somebody asks us about ourselves, we give all of the good quality. Yeah, you know, I did this and I got this and I did, and that's not you. You know, that's representation of you. But the real you, you know, when nobody's around, you know. So, and then, yeah, as they say, you have a person that you are in public, you have a person in private, who you are in private, and then there's the real you. That's the part you got to fix, because that real you is out of control. You know, that's the one that if somebody saw, you'd be like, man, I'm done. That's the part he's talking about, that soul that's mutmainna. And we all got it. We all got it. But then he mentioned in the earlier part that we also have the having this divine soul like Ibrahim. If we work on removing these bad praiseworthy characteristics, then we're not driven by emotions or desires, because the soul by itself, it wants to do that. And that's what one of the scholars I mentioned, Sheikh Mendez, may Allah preserve. I like this topic that he gave. He said the meaning of tasawwuf is to the spiritual path of overcoming discomfort, because your soul. So the word tasawwuf comes from a word means like to wear woolen garments. And so the early spiritual masters, they used to wear these raggedy woolen garments. You know, if you wear wool, what does wool do to you? It itches, uncomfortable. So that's why they wore it. So they wanted to make themselves uncomfortable with ease, so it can lead them to detach from the world. So that's one of the meanings. But then the meaning extends to, the spiritual path of, being comfortable with things that disrupt the soul, right? So things that encounter you, something happens, we want to take the easy way out. We don't want to face no difficulty, but the one who has true purification of their soul, it doesn't matter if times are difficult or easy, because they understand what the goal is to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that the paradise is surrounded by hardships, the things that people dislike, and the hellfire is designed surrounded by things that that are attractive. And so you have to train your soul to understand these things. But when you're in the mix, that beautiful woman, man, she got her own job, she got her own crib, she got bread, she interested in Islam. This could be a means to hellfire.
That was in how deep the angels were, right? When the law created Jannah and Jahannam, and he told them to go take a look at both of them.
No, it's not. I know how deep you're talking about, but it's not in that one.
Okay.
And so those kind of things. And then the path to Jannah is surrounded by things that you dislike, hardship, poverty, dealing with death, dealing with life on life's term, when life be lifing and we ain't ready for life to be lifing. Those are things that when you embrace them, because your soul is trained right, you have patience, you have tawakkul, and all of these things, these lead you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ultimately to Jannah. Okay, so that's the end of that. Is there any questions? Did I disconnect my people? Are you guys still there? Okay, they're still there. So this is like I said, we're going to be slow walking this book, inshallah. So it's 62 discourses. If you text me your email, I can send you it's translated. So the book is about 800 pages. So we'll probably be at this for a while, So, but this is just not really like a class, a lesson, but a reflection, So I hope you all will continue to join me, inshallah, that we extract these jewels by one of the greatest spiritual masters of all time, Shaykh Abdul Qadir al-Jilani. Is considered one of the friends of Allah. The awliya, the word they use for English is saints, but these are real righteous people who reach levels of, spirituality that many people witness, And so we have to tap into these people because they are masters in their science of tasawwuf, and not just tasawwuf. He was a master in Aqidah and fiqh, hadith, and all of these sciences. But then, the goal of all of that stuff is to refine your character, and he's going to talk about that in the later part of the book. Even when you take your shahada, is it really valid if you have nothing to substantiate it? And so that's going to be another discussion. So any questions from our online audience? You all good? Yeah, you can let me know if y'all still alive. Okay, thumbs up works. Okay, good. Alhamdulillah. Okay, so we'll stop there. We resume next week. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to increase us in true iman and true patience and true tawakkul. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive us for our shortcomings and our bad deeds. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to recognize the evil within ourselves and remove it. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the ability to replace them with good traits so we can be those people who fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by way of proper knowledge. I mean, Subhanaka Allahumma wa bihamdika wa nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta wa nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun wa salamun ala mursaleen walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Al-Fatiha. Ameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.